The Gospel of Barnabas, edited and translated from the Italian manuscript in the Imperial Library at Vienna by Lonsdale and Laura Ragg. And this is from 1907, chapter 109. Jesus answered, "Even so I tell you, that ye ought to watch with the soul by the Son of Justice, which is our God, and not to boast yourself of the watchings of the body. It is most true, therefore, that bodily sleep is to be avoided as much as is possible, but to avoid it altogether is impossible, the sense and the flesh being weighed down with food, and the mind with busyness. Wherefore, let him that will sleep little avoid too much business and much food. As God liveth, in whose presence standeth my soul, it is lawful to sleep somewhat every night, but it is never lawful to forget God and his fearful judgment, and the sleep of the soul is such oblivion." Then answered he who writeth, "O Master, how can we always have a God in memory? Assuredly, it seemeth to us impossible," said Jesus with a sigh. "This is the greatest mystery that man can suffer, O Barnabas, for a man cannot, here upon earth, have God, his Creator, always in memory, saving them that are holy. For they always have God in memory, because they have in them the light of the grace of God, so that they cannot forget God. But tell me, have ye seen them that work quarried stones, how by their constant practice they have so learned to strike, that they speak with others, and all the time are striking the iron tool that worketh the stone, without looking at the iron, and yet they do not strike their hands? Now do ye likewise desire to be holy, if ye wish to overcome entirely this misery of forgetfulness. Sure it is that water cleaveth the hardest rocks with a single drop, striking there for a long period. Do ye know why ye have not overcome this misery? Because ye have not perceived that it is sin. I tell you then that it is an error, when a prince giveth thee a present, O man, that thou shouldest shut thine eyes and turn thy back upon him. Even so do they err who forget God, for at all times man receiveth from God gifts and mercy." And so there's more to it than just mentioning the name. But, like the definition of religion being a relationship with God and the created. And you realize the created as the created, and then your consciousness of God permeates in various ways one's relationship with the created things. 110. Now tell me, doth our God at all times grant you his bounty? Yea, assuredly, for unceasingly he ministereth to you the breath whereby ye live. Verily, verily, I say unto you, every time that your body receiveth breath, your heart ought to say, God be thanked. Then said John, It is most true what thou sayest, O Master. Teach us therefore the way to attain to this blessed condition. Jesus answered, Verily I say to you, one cannot attain to such condition by human powers, but rather by the mercy of God our Lord. It is true indeed that man ought to desire the good in order that God may give it him. Tell me, when ye are at table, do ye take those meats which ye would not so much look at? No, assuredly, even so I say unto you, that ye shall not receive that which ye will not desire. God is able, if ye desire holiness, to make you holy in less time than the twinkling of an eye. But in order that man may be sensible of the gift, and the giver, our God, willeth that we should wait and ask, have ye seen them that practice shooting at a mark? Assuredly, they shoot many times in vain. Howbeit, they never wish to shoot in vain, but are always in hope to hit the mark. They're talking about limiting central action guns. Well, guns not being as accurate, doesn't that cause a lot of hunting accidents? Now, do this, ye who ever desire to have our God in remembrance, and when ye forget mourn, for God shall give you grace to attain to all that I have said. Fasting and spiritual watching are so united one with the other that, if one break the watch, straightway the fast is broken. For in sinning a man breaketh the fast of the soul, and forgetteth God. So it is that watching and fasting, as regardeth the soul, are always necessary for us and for all men. For to none is it lawful to sin, but the fasting of the body and its watchings. Believe me, they are not possible at all times, nor for all persons. For there are sick and aged folk, women with child, men that are put upon diet, children, and others that are of weak complexion. For indeed, everyone, even as he clothed himself, according to his proper measure, so should choose his manner of fasting. For just as the garments of a child are not suitable for a man of 30 years, even so the watchings and fastings of one are not suitable for another. And particularly when we get into the voluntary endeavors, it's something that would have to vary per individual. But, previously we saw that, it's not about indulging in sleep and eat and drink. And now we find it's not about not indulging in eat and sleep and drink, But you take care of yourself. 111. But beware that Satan will use all his strength to bring it to pass that ye shall watch during the night, and afterward be sleeping, when by commandment of God ye ought to be praying, and listening to the word of God. Tell me, would it please you if a friend of yours should eat the meat and give you the bones? Peter answered, No, master, for such an one ought not to be called friend, but a mocker. Jesus answered with a sigh, Thou hast well said the truth, O Peter. For verily one that watcheth with the body more than is necessary, sleeping or having his head weighed down with slumber, when he should be praying or listening to the words of God, such a wretch mocketh God, his Creator, and is so guilty of such a sin. Moreover, he is a robber, seeing that he stealeth the time that he ought to give to God, and spendeth it when and as much as pleaseth him. In the vessel of the best wine a man gave his enemies to drink so long as the wine was at its best, but when the wine came down to the dregs, he gave to his lord to drink. What think ye will the master do to his servant, when he shall know all, and the servant be before him? Assuredly he will beat him and slay him in righteous indignation, according to the laws of the world. Well, just because people have decided it's righteous to And now what shall God do to the man that spendeth the best of his time in business, and the worst in prayer and study of the law? Woe to the world, because with this, and with greater sin, is its heart weighed down. Accordingly, when I said unto you, that laughter should be turned into weeping, feasts into fasting, and sleep into watching, I compassed in 3 words all that ye have heard, that here on earth one ought always to weep, and that weeping should be from the heart, because God our Creator is offended. That ye ought to fast in order to have lordship over the sense, and watch in order not to sin, and that bodily weeping and bodily fasting and watching should be done according to the constitution of each one. Well, one of the practices, of course, is to work on one's awareness and one's bodily functions. But, we're in different bodies. So, 112. Having said this, Jesus said, Ye needs must seek of the fruits of the field the wherewithal to sustain our life. For it is now 8 days that we have eaten no bread. Wherefore I will pray to our God, and will await you with Barnabas. So all the disciples and apostles departed by fours and by sixes, and went their way according to the word of Jesus. There remained with Jesus he who writeth. Whereupon Jesus weeping said, O Barnabas, it is necessary that I should reveal to thee great secrets, which after that I shall be departed from the world. Thou shalt reveal to it. Then answered he that writeth, weeping, and said, Suffer me to weep, O Master, and other men also, for that we are sinners, and thou that art an holy one, and prophet of God, it is not fitting for thee to weep so much. Jesus answered, Believe me, Barnabas, that I cannot weep as much as I ought. For if men had not called me God, I should have seen God here, as he will be seen in paradise, and should have been safe, not to fear the day of judgment. But God knoweth that I am innocent, because never have I harbored thought to be held more than a poor slave. And that's why we see, like, for example, in the Muslim creed, that people test Abduhu, the servant, slave, devotee of him, of God. Nay, I tell thee that if I had not been called God, I should have been carried into paradise when I shall depart from the world, whereas now I shall not go thither until the judgment. Now thou seest if I have cause to weep. Know, O Barnabas, that for this I must have great persecution, and shall be sold by one of my disciples for 30 pieces of money. Whereupon I am sure that he who shall sell me shall be slain in my name. For that God shall take me up from the earth, and shall change the appearance of the traitor, so that every one shall believe him to be me. Nevertheless, when he dieth an evil death, I shall abide in that dishonor for a long time in the world. But when Muhammad shall come, the sacred messenger of God, that infamy shall be taken away. And this shall God do, because I confessed the truth of the Messiah, who shall give me this reward, that I shall be known to be alive, and to be a stranger to that death of infamy. Then answered he that writeth, O Master, tell me, who is that wretch? For I fain would choke him to death. Hold thy peace, answered Jesus, for so God willeth, and he cannot do otherwise. But see thou, that when my mother is afflicted at such an event, tell thou her the truth, in order that she may be comforted. Then answered he who writeth, All this will I do, O Master, if God please. (113) When the disciples were come, they brought pine cones. The Vatican uses this pine cone symbolism, but that's related to something else. And by the will of God, they found a good quantity of dates. So after the midday prayer, they ate with Jesus. Whereupon the apostles and disciples, seeing him that writeth of sad countenance, feared that Jesus needs must quickly depart from the world. Whereupon Jesus consoled them, saying, Fear not, for my hour is not yet come that I should depart from you. I shall abide with you still for a little while. Therefore must I teach you now, in order that ye may go, as I have said, through all Israel to preach penitence, in order that God may have mercy upon the sin of Israel. Let every one therefore beware of sloth, and much more he that doth penance, because every tree that beareth not good fruit shall be cut down and cast into the fire. There was a citizen who had a vineyard, and in the midst thereof had a garden, which had a fine fig tree, whereon for 3 years, when the owner came, he found no fruit, and seeing every other tree bear fruit. Therefore he said to his vinedresser, Cut down this bad tree, for it cumbereth the ground. The vinedresser answered, Not so, my lord, for it is a beautiful tree. Hold thy peace, said the owner, for I care not for the useless beauties. Thou shouldest know that the palm and the balsam are nobler than the fig. But I had planted in the courtyard of my house a plant of palm and one of balsam, which I had surrounded with costly walls. But when these bear no fruit, but leaves which heaped upon themselves up and putrefied the ground in front of the house, I caused them both to be removed. And how shall I pardon a fig tree far from the house, which cumbereth my garden, and my vineyard, where every other tree beareth fruit? Assuredly, I will not suffer it any longer. Then said the vine dresser, Lord, the soil is too rich. Wait therefore 1 year more, for I will prune the fig plant's branches, and take away from it the richness of the soil, putting in poor soil with stones, and so shall it bear fruit. The owner answered, Now go and do so, for I will wait, and the fig plant shall bear fruit. Understand ye this parable? The disciples answered, No, Lord. Therefore explain it to us. Yeah, because replacing good soil with bad soil and added some rocks in, how is that going to work? 114. Jesus answered, Verily I say unto you, the owner is God, and the vine dresser is his law. God then had in paradise the palm and the balsam, for Satan is the palm, and the first man the balsam. Them did he cast out, because they bear not fruit of good works, but uttered ungodly words, that were the condemnation of many angels and many men. Now that God hath man in the world, in the midst of his creatures that serve God, all of them according to his precept, and a man, I say, bearing no fruit, God would come down and commit him to hell, seeing he pardoned not the angel and the first man, punishing the angel eternally, and the man for a time, whereupon the law of God saith that man hath too much good in this life, and so it is necessary that he should suffer tribulation and be deprived of earthly goods in order that he may do good works. Therefore our God waiteth for man to be penitent. Verily I say unto you, that our God hath condemned man to work, so that, as said Job, the friend and prophet of God, as the bird is born to fly and the fish to swim, even so is the man born to work. So also David our father, a prophet of God, saith, Eating the labors of our hands, we shall be blessed, and it shall be well with us. Wherefore let every one work according to his quality. Now tell me, if David our father and Solomon his son worked with their hands, what ought the sinner to do? Said John, Master, to work is a fitting thing, but this ought the poor to do. Jesus answered, Yea, for they cannot do otherwise. But knowest thou not that good, to be good, must be free from necessity? Thus the sun and the other planets are strengthened by the precepts of God, so that they cannot do otherwise. Wherefore they shall have no merit. Tell me, when God gave the precept to work, he said not, A poor man shall live of the sweat of his face. And Job did not say that, As a bird is born to fly, so a poor man is born to work. But God said to man, In the sweat of thy countenance shalt thou eat bread. And Job that man is born to work. Therefore only he who is not man is free from this precept. Assuredly, for no other reason are all things costly, but that there are a great multitude of idle folk. If these were to labor, some attending the ground and some at fishing the water, there would be the greatest plenty in the world, and of the lack thereof it would be necessary to render an account in the dreadful day of judgment. And all sorts of work. See, the thing is, there's not really the shortage of the physical things or the spiritual opportunity. There's a shortage of people doing what they can with what they have. Yeah, there has to be some principles of organization and acting and that sort of stuff. But 115. Let man say somewhat to me, what hath he brought into the world? By reason of which he would live in idleness. Certain it is that he was born naked and incapable of anything. Hence, of all that he has found, he is not the owner, but the dispenser, and he will have to render an account thereof in that dreadful day. The abominable lust that maketh man like the brute beasts ought greatly to be feared, for the enemy is of one's household, so that it is not possible to go into any place whither thine enemy may not come. Ah, how many have perished through lust! through lust came the deluge, insomuch that the world perished before the mercy of God, and so that there were saved only Noah and 83 human persons. For lust God overwhelmed 3 wicked cities, whence escaped only Lot and his 2 children. For lust the tribe of Benjamin was all but extinguished, and I tell you verily that if I should narrate to you how many have perished through lust, the space of 5 days would not suffice. James answered, O Master, what signifieth lust? Jesus answered, Lust is an unbridled desire of love, which, not being directed by reason, bursts the bounds of man's intellect and affections, so that the man, not knowing himself, loveth that which he ought to hate. Believe me, when a man loveth a thing, not because God hath given him such thing, but as its owner, he is a fornicator. For that the soul which ought to abide in union with God, its creator, he hath united with the creature. And so God lamenteth by Isaiah the prophet, saying, Thou hast committed fornication with many lovers, nevertheless return unto me, and I will receive thee. As God liveth, in whose presence my soul standeth, if there were not internal lust within the heart of man, he would not fall into the external. For if the root be removed, the tree dieth speedily. Let a man content himself, therefore, with the wife whom his Creator hath given him, and let him forget every other woman. Andrew answered, How shall a man forget the women if he live in the city, where there are so many of them? Jesus replied, O Andrew, certain it is he who liveth in the city, it will do him harm, seeing that the city is a sponge that draweth in every iniquity. Well, one of the trends of the past 40,000 years is, the talk about the risk of the city, but there's also the talk about the reward of civilization too. But we need to address the reward and the control systems, because if we're just controlling ourselves from the outside, then stuff is going to come forth. But the thing here is, it's not that these categories of life are wrong, because obviously, be content with one's spouse. It's, that there's not the consciousness and principle with it. 116. It behooveth a man to live in the city, even as the soldier liveth when he hath enemies around the fortress, defending himself against every assault, and always fearing treachery on the part of the citizens. Even so I say, let him repel every outward enticement of sin, and fear the sense, because it hath a supreme desire for things impure. But how shall he defend himself if he bridle not the eye, which is the origin of every carnal sin? As God liveth, in whose presence my soul standeth, he who hath not bodily eyes is secure not to receive punishment, save only to the 3rd degree, while he that hath eyes receiveth to the 7th degree. In the time of the prophet Elijah, it came to pass that Elijah, seeing a blind man weeping, a man of good life, asked him, saying, Why weepest thou, O brother? The blind man answered, I weep because I cannot see Elijah the prophet, the Holy One of God. Then Elijah rebuked him, saying, Cease from weeping, O man, for in weeping thou sinnest. The blind man answered, Now tell me, is it a sin to see a holy prophet of God that raiseth the dead, and maketh fire to come down from heaven? Elijah answered, Thou speakest not the truth, for Elijah is not able to do anything of all that thou sayest, because he is a man as thou art. For all the men in the world cannot make one to fly, to be born. Said the blind man, Thou sayest this, O man, because Elijah must have rebuked thee for some sin of thine, wherefore thou hatest him. Elijah answered, May it please God that thou be speaking the truth, because, O brother, if I should hate Elijah, I should love God, and the more I should hate Elijah, the more I should love God. Hereupon was the blind man greatly angered, and said, As God liveth, thou art an impious fellow. Can God then be loved, while one hateth the prophets of God? Begone forthwith, for I will not listen to thee any longer. Elijah answered, Brother, now mayest thou see with thine intellect how evil is bodily seeing, for thou desirest sight to see Elijah, and hatest Elijah with thy soul. The blind man answered, Now begone, for thou art the devil, that wouldest make me sin against the Holy One of God. Then Elijah gave a sigh and said with tears, Thou hast spoken the truth, O brother, for my flesh, which thou desirest to see, separate thee from God. Said the blind man, I do not wish to see thee, nay, if I had my eyes, I would close them so as not to see thee. Then said Elijah, Know, brother, that I am Elijah. The blind man answered, Thou speakest not the truth. Then the disciples of Elijah, Brother, he verily is the prophet of God, Elijah. Elijah answered, Thou art of the tribe of Levi, and because thou, in entering the temple of God, lookest lewdly upon a woman, thou being near the sanctuary, our God took away thy sight. Then the blind man weeping said, Pardon me, O holy prophet of God, for I have sinned in speaking with thee. For if I had seen thee, I should not have sinned. Elijah answered, May our God pardon thee, O brother, because as regardeth me, I know that thou hast told me the truth, seeing that the more I hate myself, the more I love God. And if thou sawest me, thou wouldst still thy desire, which is not pleasing to God. For Elijah is not your creator, but God. Whence, so far as concerneth thee, I am the devil, said Elijah, weeping, because I turned thee aside from thy creator. Weep then, O brother, because thou hast not that light, which would make thee see the truth from the false. For thou hadst that thou wouldst not have despised my doctrine. Wherefore I say unto thee, that many desire to see me, and come from far to see me, who despise my words. Wherefore it were better for them, for their salvation, that they had no eyes, seeing that every one that findeth pleasure in the creature be he who may, and seeketh not to find pleasure in God, hath made an idol in his heart, and forsaken God. Then said Jesus, sighing, Have ye understood all that Elijah said? The disciples answered, In sooth, we have understood, and we are, besides ourselves, at the knowledge that here on earth there are very few that are not idolaters. Shirking from monotheism is probably a easier way to think about that, right? But you never know what good or bad deeds will justify being in a certain position.